Tell me when.
Don't start with so.
Count me down. Don't start with so. Don't
start
say
with
just.
So. Just don't say just, and don't start with so.
Can I say stop it? It's good to be back into the whole series of Masterclass. And this week, I think, Ken, we're going to start looking at the danger of self-deception.
Right.
That was the thread that came out of the message.
Right.
But before that, I just want to bring an encouragement to the community groups. It's been phenomenal that during 2019, we're up to 1,450 people attending community groups. So we want to thank the leaders for that, and we want to say that just continue to participate, continue to be a part of that, and if you can invite people out, that would be phenomenal. So I just would like
absolutely brilliant.
Absolutely marvelous.
Yeah,
okay, cool.
Stop it.
Yeah. So Ken, actually, you gave a little kind of image
right.
to start your word out.
Right.
And it was this this lady who'd been kind of self-deceived, and she went to see a doctor or whatever.
Right.
And he gave her a bit of advice. What was that kind of advice, and what was the kind of story?
Advice was stop it.
Stop it.
Basic idea. We've been it's kind of funny coming from me because we've got this program and stuff, and we look back at our past of why we do certain things, but we've kind of been psychologicalized to death.
Right.
And some things, and so it's the balance of that, because our culture, for example, we're talking about the wisdom of the world versus the wisdom of God. Our culture always wants to find the reason and find the root and the medical approach. If I can just find, it was my grade 2 teacher or my mom that did this, that's why I'm doing this. And we have this idea, if we can identify the problem, that'll fix it. But there are some things, God's pretty clear, just stop some things.
Yeah.
And we don't have to figure it all out. We don't have to life map it. There's something, just stop it.
Right.
And that was it would be very politically incorrect now, that video clip of Bob Newhart and things like that, but there was some wisdom to that.
Yeah.
Kind of like if you got a 3-year-old daughter, you don't think through all the psychological and sociological issues of why they need to put a jacket on. You just put the jacket on, let's go outside.
Yeah.
And sometimes we got to take that approach to balance out the wisdom of the world that always thinks we need a doctor and a psychologist and psychiatrist to figure it all out.
Yeah. So the danger, I think, is that we start kind of that idea in James 1, that we look at it, we desire it, we want to do it, and we get captured by it.
Right.
And I think that this passage is kind of touching on don't be deceived.
Right.
So that self-deception thing. So just kind of coming out of that, what kind of practical safeguards can we put in our lives to kind of limit that or not be deceived?
Right.
What kind of practical things could we do? A few things.
Okay, just before we hit the practical, remind me if I forget that. But one of the biggest problems with the wisdom of the world, there's 2 problems, is it's temporal and it's limited. So if you just think, I guess this would be a practical thing, and I actually brought it up at the very end of the message. I said, divide all of your decisions by eternity.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a weird statement, but what I mean by that is, practical safeguards is every decision you make, think through in 5 years.
Yeah.
Is this bringing, let's take your marriage, for example.
Yeah.
In the moment, the flesh, I feel like arguing or yelling or whatever, and that feels good at the moment, right? But is that getting me closer to what I really want? So that's dividing things by eternity. Or if I keep this practice of spending like I am now, think through in 10 years, where are we going to be? Because what happens in some of those areas, we go by the wisdom of the world, which says you can have everything and you can have it now. That's the temporal thing, right? You can have everything and have it now. And so you live that way, and then you begin to resent the people who are actually responsible with their money and were willing to put up with less initially, and they would actually save. Yeah. And then you begin to resent them and resent God because they've got it easy.
Yeah.
So that's one of the problems with the wisdom of the world. It's so temporal, right? And then the other thing, it's limited. I got a great story in this. So one of my adult children, he was 18, and I won't tell you which of my sons, but it wasn't Colin. Okay, so it was the other one, and he goes to village. But anyway, so he's 18 years old, and he comes and he wants to be a whitewater raft guide.
Right.
And my wife didn't want him to be a whitewater raft guide because it's scary and all that kind of stuff. And this is what he said to me. He says, "Dad, this is all I'll ever ask for. This is all I want. This is going to make me happy." And I'm thinking, you got to shoot a little higher, But my point is, he really meant that. It's temporal, it's limited. This is all I want. And he really believes that. And that's how we are sometimes. So the safeguard, back to, if you want to get practical in that, but back to inviting God into decisions and dividing everything by eternity, dividing it by 5 years, 10 years. Will this really matter? Yeah. And we don't want to do that because we do want to have it all and we want to have it now. So that would be the safeguard. Divide everything by eternity. So what would be a cool question, I know it's not in the brilliant questions that you wrote out, but a question would be, think in your small group right now, you could just think through all the decisions you're making right now, and if you would divide them by eternity, how would you change them? That'd be kind of fun.
That's a good one. So the second thing I'd like to look at, Ken, is this whole idea is that the truth can set us free.
Right.
And you mentioned before about kind of secular philosophy, Freud, all those things, they can just capture us subliminally.
Right.
You know, we're in it, we get
Right.
saturated by it, it affects us. And the other idea that in Proverbs, it talks about Proverbs 9, about the fear of the Lord is the start of wisdom. We're not used to that word in
Right.
our kind of culture, our kind of fearing things.
Right.
You know, we want to be pacified, we want
Yeah.
to get what we want, you know.
And we
So-
want to look at God as our buddy.
Yeah.
Like we don't like that concept, right?
Yeah, so could you unpack, you know, this whole thing about what it means to fear God?
Right.
Is it mean afraid, or does it
Right.
mean kind of reverential fear?
Yeah.
You know, how does that work? And at the back end of that, if that's drawing us to love God more,
Right.
how do we walk in that? How do we, with our heart, soul, and mind,
Sure.
actually love God more? So the first bit is the
Okay.
fear thing.
Okay, I'll try to separate those a bit. I think the fearing God, the reason why we don't like that is because a lot of us grew up where God was this killjoy, this guy that looked up front and from above, and you did anything wrong, he'd step on you, right? That kind of a thing. And we were raised that way. And so we didn't like that idea. And the new preaching came out in the 70s, 80s. He's your buddy, that kind of thing. God loves you, which is all true. I don't know if he's your buddy part, but he loves you and all that. So it's kind of like a swing from the pendulum. And we've lost that fear of the Lord. And
Right.
we don't like the idea of fearing God like being afraid. But that's not what the word means.
Right.
It's in terms of reverence and priority. It's who comes first.
Yes.
That's what it means. And so really, for me practically, and I know you can divide that in different ways of what it means to fear God. For me personally,
Yeah.
it means what I kind of brought up in the conclusion of the message, that it's making an executive decision
Yeah.
that in advance, if God and I disagree on anything,
Yeah.
I determine in advance he's right and I'm wrong.
Yeah.
That's what it means for me.
Right.
And that's also why, for me personally, I have my regular quiet times.
Yeah.
That's part, for me, that's part of fearing God. Because I find that he warns me, he prepares me, he convicts me of, like, one of my issues is pride. I don't even see when my pride comes up, and it looks like the flesh. Sometimes my pride actually comes up in me defending myself or not listening to criticism or too quickly defending that kind of thing. I just, whatever.
Yeah.
But when you're in the scripture, that's part of fearing the Lord, putting him first. It's actually saying that I'm not smart enough on my own to figure this out. We don't like that because everyone's a snowflake.
Yeah.
And, we all grew up and whatever you think is right, that's your truth, and it's garbage. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then the other problem also is, like I brought up, we're all going to die.
Yeah.
We're all going to die. We're going to stand before God, and those who have feared him, learned a reverent respect for him and his ways, won't fear that day.
No.
You're either going to fear God or you're going to fear pretty much anyone else.
Yeah.
And there's a whole pile of us that fear people. We actually make people our God.
Yeah.
We can make our kids our God, our wives our God, and they're supposed to be important,
Yeah.
or our husbands are God, whatever, but we actually make them more important. So that's what it means to fear God. Put him first. If God and I disagree on anything, he's right and I'm wrong. I might wrestle with him for a couple days and whine and complain of why I shouldn't have to do this, but
Yeah.
he kind of knows he's got me over a barrel because I made that executive decision, right?
Yeah.
So that's what that means. How to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. That's kind of changed for me as I've, I was going to say got older, but as I matured, right? What it's mean more, and I didn't really have the time to unpack it, but love the Lord with all your God, all soul, heart, and mind. It changes the motives for why you obey.
Right.
Because a lot of my life I would do the right things, and I guess we're probably getting to the third question, but I would do the right things for the wrong reason because I didn't want the consequence.
Right.
I didn't want to feel guilt, or I didn't want God to be displeased, or I didn't want to have to make it right later, or, I didn't, whatever. But when you realize, and that's why I guess I brought up at the end of the sermon,
Yeah.
God knows we're going to make all these mistakes.
Yeah.
And yes, we're supposed to stop it and we're supposed to do all this, but he still knows and he still loves us and he still celebrates when we do the right things for the right things. Like,
Yeah.
it's amazing, and I just don't know anyone like that. So my point is, if I can make my motive for obedience because I love God and what he's done, it's a game changer.
Yeah.
It makes and you fall in love with God.
Yeah.
Like, that's the amazing part about grace, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what it means to love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the other little piece on that too is to ask him to make what's important to him important to me.
Yeah.
My marriage is important to him. It's important to me.
Yeah.
Lost people are important to him, and so therefore they become important to me.
Yeah.
You're important to him. You become important to me. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it also, I mean, you could go on and on and on. What it means changing your bucket list, changing your goals in life. That's a real important one too.
Yeah.
Like if God is actually smarter than me and he created me, then I won't actually be happy or find fulfillment unless I figure out how he uniquely created me and what he wanted me to do in this world.
Yeah.
So that's all part of it. I guess we go on and on, but your turn to talk about what it means for you to love Lord God with all your heart, soul, and mind.
Yeah. So let's do that. Let's just catch that. Let's do what Ken said. Let's talk about how we can respect God, that reverential fear, and then how we can actually love God with all our heart and soul and mind. So the next thing, Ken, that we'd like to look at is this whole idea of relationships, right. And you brought some stuff out of that on as a part of your word, and doing things the right and wrong way. And you gave the example of Moses, right, in Acts 7, and obviously there's a good reaction that he has, right, and a bad reaction, and kind of how could you kind of unpack that for us? And on the back end of that is how we kind of better represent Jesus in our relationships, sure, with each other and our marriages.
Right.
So the first bit's about Moses, and the second right. bit is just right. how we represent Jesus.
Right. Well, the story of Moses, you can apply that so many ways, trying to do the right thing. He wanted to do the right thing. He wanted to deliver his people. He had a love for his people. He knew they were God's people. He wanted to do it. He just was going to do it in the ways of the world. Use power, use persuasion, use whatever. Yeah. Okay. So let's take that principle, and we can apply it to so many areas. Let's take it in marriage. Like I talked about, relationships of people who were in a sexual relationship, we're not married, and then I talked about long-standing marriages. Well, let's talk about the middle gap, right? So you got a young family, for example. Yeah. What's doing the right thing? Well, you want to provide for your family. You want them to be happy. You want your kids to have a meaningful life, and so you just go by the wisdom of the world, and that tells you to make them busy. It tells you to get them in hockey, soccer, basketball, volleyball, 15 instruments or whatever, and it just tells you to do it. So your motive is right. You want your kids to grow up, have a fulfilling life, but you don't actually ask God what is the right balance. Yeah. You can do that in your relationships. You want to work things out with your spouse. You want to work things out with your boyfriend, your girlfriend. You want to work things out with the people at work. Yeah. And so right away, that's a good goal. God wants us to live in harmony. So you do it with persuasion. You do it with arguing. You do it with, here's another one, we withdraw because we think that we're better off to not feel pain. Yeah. Well, that's not true. The pain, the conflict's there. Yeah. Just listened to someone on the radio saying that a lot of Christians think that in relationships, as a Christian, you're not supposed to have conflict. Jesus had conflict with everybody. Oh, yeah. He spoke the truth and he spoke in love and he still had conflict. So that's not actually goal, speaking the truth in love. So my point is, again, inviting God into God, how do you, and it sounds like a no-brainer, but it's a discipline. God, how do you want me to respond in this relationship? Yeah. How busy do you want our children? How much, let's take one thing we often fight about in marriage is money. Yeah. How much do you want us to spend on this next vehicle? Yeah. How much do you want us to spend? But we don't want to ask those questions because we already know what we want. Yeah. Right? And so that's what I mean by that.
Bringing God into that.
Bring him in first. Yeah. Right? Another little thing, I didn't really cover it, but little thing on, some people say, for example, when you buy a truck or a car, God gave me the loan. Well, if you really believe God gave you the loan, then you should be celebrating and jumping up and down every time you make a payment. But what happens is 3 years down the road, you're resenting God for this debt. You want to get him out of the debt. Yeah. He gave you the loan. So my point is, you don't really believe that. You didn't invite God in necessarily to how much should we borrow. Yeah. And I'm not even saying don't borrow. I'm just saying invite him in first and actually seek that out.
Great. So let's grab that as a group. Let's think about how we can invite God into our decision making, whether that applies to our finances and kind of practical issues, but also into our marriages and our relationships. Right. That rather than just kind of jumping in on an emotional issue and blowing up, actually we can wait on God and hear from him first. Right. And actually there's a cascade from the top down. We're guys, we're leading our homes, and that we're going to realize that those ripples can affect everyone and even go further. So, let's see how God can speak to us and through us into our relationships, and let's discuss that as a group. So guys, I just want to say again that we're so excited for 2019. God's going to do some amazing things. One thing we'd like you to do is to actually pray for Alpha. That will be starting up in February at Langley South and Surrey. And if you could just pray into that as groups. And thanks again for being with us, and we'll see you next time.